Good day, dear students. Today we have lesson number 6, and the topic is enumeration type. An enumeration type is a type, we can call it enum, and we use it when we have a fixed set of possible values. For example, our Russian students can get only 5 marks at schools. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1 is very bad, 2 is bad, satisfactory 3, and good for 4, and excellent for 5 mark. So only 5 fixed set possible values. So we can use this type to work with it. How to work with this type? We are going to understand by making this lab number 1. So we are going to do this lab and to understand how to work with enum type. And let's consider the task of this lab 1. So we have to request user to input a number, a mark. So he can input 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. We have to check the inputted number to print out the characteristic of the mark. If 1 was inputted, so we have to print out very bad. If 2 was inputted, we have to print out bad. 3 satisfactory, good for 4 mark, and excellent for 5 mark. So we have to output the string, some characteristic of the mark. And also output the mark for the characteristic of satisfactory. So we can see that here are 2 portions of our task. The first portion, this one, so we are going to output the characteristic of the mark. And the second part, the second portion of the task, we are going to print out the number for the characteristic satisfactory. So the first part we are going to output string type, and the second part we are going to output the number, integer number. And we have note here that we must create a function called checkmark with a switch statement in it to check the mark. So to do this part, to make this portion, we are going to create a function with a switch statement. And for this portion we don't need any functions. So let's begin to make this lab. And also we have example here what we are going to see in our console window after we run our program. So the example of the output, we have to do it just like here. Please enter the number. So we are going to see it in our console window. So let's open Visual Studio, menu, file, new, project. We have console application, C#, and here we have to type our name of the project. We have here it, and click OK, press OK. Okay, I have it, so I'll put here underlining. Okay, and we must rename our program CS. We have the name for our program CS here. We can copy it, right click mouse and rename, and we have our own name for our CS file. Yes. So we have CS file. Here we have the text by default, the code by default. They are the same. It is the same as in usual console project. So what we have to do, what must we do first? Let's create our enumeration type. Let's call it mark, because the name of the variables and enumerations and every structure, the names have to be meaningful. So let's call it mark, and you have to know that we have to declare enumeration type before the static void main function, before the main function here. And we have to start with enum keyword. Enum, it is a type of enumeration for our variable marks. Let's call it marks. And look here, it is better to start with capital letter for enum type. It can be any name, but to start with capital letter. And here inside the curly braces, we have to print out our characteristics. So what we have for the marks? We have very bad for one mark. We can copy it. Then we have bad. Then satisfactory, good, and excellent. Separate them by commas. Satisfactory, good, and excellent. And let's add one more mark, but it is not a mark. No such mark. It will help us if the user will input some different mark, not from 1 to 5. And then we have to put semicolon. Okay. We have declared our marks enum. So here we are going to use this enum mark to do something with it. So we have our task. First task we are going to do, it's the second portion of our task, because it is much more easier than the first one. We have to output the mark for the characteristic of satisfactory. So we have to output some number. We know that it is 3, but let's ask to do it compiler. Just we know that there is a characteristic satisfactory, and we want to know what the mark coincides to this satisfactory, matches to this satisfactory characteristic. So let's create. We have to declare some variable. It has to be integer, because this number is integer, yes. So we have to declare integer. Let's call it, for example, x equals to marks satisfactory, to characteristic satisfactory. To use it, we have to type here our type marks, and then we use dot, and we choose satisfactory characteristic. Look here, we have red underlining, so there is an error here. Yes, cannot implicitly convert type to int. So marks is the type, enum type, has enum type, and x is integer type, so we have to convert it to integer type. Usually we use this int32 class to convert, to parse. But look here, if we do it as usual, if we make it as usual, we have underlining again, because parse used is used only for string type. Look here, we have a hint here, IntelliSense. So we have parse, and in parentheses we have string type, But marks is not a string type. It is enum type. So we clear this conversion, and we will use another conversion. There is another way to convert it to integer. Just in parentheses we have int, and we don't need it. So before this marks satisfactory, we put here int inside the parentheses. So we have x, and x will be equals to 3, as we understand. But look here, every this item of the marks has its own index. The first one starts with 0 index. It will be 0, it's 1, it's 2. Yes, it's 3, it's 4, it's 5, and so on, if we will have more of them. So we need to output not x, because satisfactory is not 2 mark, but +1. Yes, +1. Let's do it. And then we have to output it. We usually print out console, right line, and always we have to print console. Let's create here, include here this class, not to print out always class console. We are going to put here using static system console. And we don't need to put here always console anymore. So we just can put right line, and that's all. Right line, without console. Right line. What we are going to print out? We are going to print out, and also characteristic satisfactory is for 3 mark. Yes, the characteristic satisfactory is for 3 mark. Let's copy it and paste it here after the $sign. But characteristic is good, but 3 mark is not good, because we are going to put here x, because 3 will be here inside of x. It will be stored inside of x, and here we'll have an answer. So let's run this project to see this portion, the result of this portion of our task. Control F5. And also the characteristic satisfactory is for 3 mark. So it is correct. We have a 3 mark here, because we have done this +1, and satisfactory is a 3 mark, as we can see it in our satisfactory 3 in our lab. Yes. So it is the second part, it is easy part. Let's do the first part of our project, of our lab 1. And we have to use here the function called check mark. Within the function there has to be a switch statement to check the mark. And let's consider the function. We are going to pass some number mark. To pass it into our function. So we will have the argument for the mark. And also we are going to return some value, to return a value satisfactory or bad or very bad, a value to return it to the caller in the main program. So we are going to use two arguments for the check mark function. We are going to create it. We must do it here or here, not within the main function. Let's do it after main function. We have to put the keyword static, then void, and the name of our function check mark with capital letter, check mark. And here we have to place our parameters. There are two of them, as we understand. Within this parenthesis we have to put our parameters. The first parameter will be the mark. It is integer 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. So we have int and let's call it mark. And you are not to mix them. Here we have the type marks and here type enum, and here we have integer mark, comma, and the second parameter will be these characteristics, some of these characteristics. So the type of this variable will be marks. It is a type of the variable. So we have to put it not int, not string, not double, but marks. And let's call it something like these. Let's call it characteristic. It is long but understandable, meaningful. Characteristic. Okay. Here we are going to use the statement, switch statement to check the value of the mark variable. We have to put switch, then inside this parenthesis we are going to put our variable mark, so it will be passed from the main method into the checkmark function, checkmark method. Mark, we are going to check it. We have curly braces for switch statement, so we need to check it here. And we have some cases here. We are going to have some cases here for 1 mark, for 2 mark, for 3 mark, for 4 mark, for 5 mark, and if a user inputs something different, we have to output some sentence to tell him that it was invalid selection. So let's do it. Case 1. So it means that if mark equals to 1, we are going to assign to our characteristic the value of marks dot bad, very bad. 1 equals to very bad, and then we have to put semicolon, and in switch statements we always have to put a break statement after each case statement. characteristic, and we have it here. Then the same for 2, but for 2 mark we have not very bad, but bad, just bad. For 3 mark we have it is very useful drop down menu here. 3 mark it's satisfactory, and for 4 mark we have good, and for 5 mark we have excellent. Excellent we have here. And by default it is also the statement default. And what we are going to do, we are going to write line invalid sentence to print out it. Write line, we don't need console class here because we use it here using static system console. Write line, and let's make some sentence invalid selection. We have to tell it to user, please enter from 1 to 5. From 1 to 5. Okay, and we see that we have red underlining because we need break also here. Break. Okay, no underlining. Let's look again. Let's look at the signature of our method. We have a check mark method. It is void because the type of the return value is nothing. We don't return anything. We are not going to return anything by using a return statement, but we are going to return some value using this parameter. So we are going to use this parameter to have some value here and to pass it, to return it back to our program. And if it has to be returned, we need out here. Out means that it will be returned. Some value will be returned there in the main function. Okay, what we have here? Look here. If we have out parameter, we need to initialize it just inside this method. It has to be initialized inside this method. So we have to assign some value to it. Any value. It doesn't matter because we will have another value after this switch statement. But before we need to put some value here. So let's do it like this. For example, marks dot and any value, it doesn't matter. But we must do it. Just we must do it. Okay. So we have this function. We have done it. We have created it. But it will not be executed until we ask to do it inside our main program. After, or let's do it before the second portion of our task, let's do this. We have to call our function. But first we need to ask the user to enter some number for our mark. Yes, we have it like here. Please enter a number. please enter a number. So right line, just in quotations, please enter a number. And then we have to read this number. We will use the variable with the same name, mark. So it will be number, integer number, mark, equals to. Now we can parse, we can use parse, so int 32 dot parse, and then read line, again without console, read line. Okay. User inputs something, some number, and then after we can call our function. It doesn't returns anything because here we have void, so we can call it just naming it, just by name, check mark, and then in the parentheses we have to type two arguments. The first argument will be mark. We have to pass this mark into this method, and it has a comma is here. And then the second parameter for characteristic, so we have to put it out. If we have out modifier here, we have to put it here also. And characteristic. It doesn't know what is characteristic, because here characteristic is a local variable. Local, just it is seen, it is accessible inside this function. And we are going to define another characteristic variable, marks, or the type marks, characteristic, and just semicolon. We have to declare it. Every variable has to be declared before it's using. So here we declared it, then we use it as an argument of our checkmark function, and here it will get some value. We are going to assign some value here to our characteristic variable, depending on the mark. So let's call our function. Please enter a number. For example, please enter a number. For example, let's do it 4. We know that a good characteristic has to be printed out. And also the characteristic, of course, we don't have any output. Look here, we call our function, but we don't print out something. We have to print out our characteristic. Let's see what we have here. The characteristic for 2 is bad, for 2 mark, but we have any mark. So we have to use right line, then $sign, and inside these quotations we have the characteristic for 4 is bad, but we have not 4, we don't know what it will be. It will be mark because the user inputs this mark. And instead of bad, we will have the result. The result is in a characteristic argument. And then semicolon. So any number can be here, and for this number we have a characteristic. here it is assigned. So Control F5. Please enter. Okay. Please enter a number. Let's do it 5. The characteristic for 5 is excellent. And the second portion, and also the characteristic satisfactory, is for 3 mark. But look here, if the user inputs not the number not from 1 through 5, but something else, for example 7, we have invalid selection. Please enter from 1 through 5. The characteristic for 7 is bad. It's not correct. What we have here, it's not correct because when we have a default is when invalid selection was done. Please enter from 1 through 5. It's good, but we have to assign to our characteristic variable our no such mark. Yes, so we have to do it here, characteristic, but here we have no such mark. Okay, and now let's try again. So come on, let's do it 7. Enter. Invalid selection. The characteristic for 7 is no such mark. It is understandable. It is good. And also the characteristic satisfactory is for 3 mark. Okay, we have done this lab. It is not so easy. It is rather complicated, I think. And I will wait your questions if you have them. So goodbye.